Sometimes the smallest delay changes the destination of an entire life. Every weekday morning, thousands of people filled the polished lobby of the Sterling Tower in downtown Chicago with the same predictable rhythm. Executives hurried toward conference rooms while assistants balanced coffee cups and tablet computers. Security officers greeted familiar faces without looking up from their desks. Cleaning staff quietly restored spotless marble floors before the next wave of footsteps erased every sign of their work. It was a world where everyone seemed to know exactly where they belonged. Everyone except Ethan Park. Standing inside the private elevator reserved for senior executives, Ethan appeared as calm and unreadable as always. His charcoal suit was perfectly tailored, his dark hair carefully styled, and his pale face revealed almost nothing to the people who worked around him. Employees respected him from a distance. Some admired him. Many feared him. No one truly knew him. Rumors surrounded his business empire, his extraordinary influence, and the mysterious discipline that defined every part of his life. One thing everyone agreed upon was remarkably simple. Ethan Park never smiled. He acknowledged people with polite nods, spoke only when necessary, and left every meeting before casual conversations could begin. Even Michael Kong, the trusted associate who had worked beside him for years, could not remember the last time Ethan had seemed genuinely interested in another person. As the elevator doors began sliding shut on the ground floor, a voice echoed across the lobby. "Please hold the elevator." It was not loud. It was simply urgent. Olivia Brooks hurried across the polished floor carrying a neatly folded stack of fresh linens almost as high as her shoulders. A housekeeping cart remained several yards behind her where another employee promised to catch up. One shoe briefly slipped against the marble, but she quickly regained her balance without dropping a single towel. Several people watched the closing elevator and immediately looked away, assuming she would miss it. Ethan did something that surprised even himself. He reached forward and quietly pressed the door open button. The elevator doors paused, then slowly opened once again. Olivia stepped inside, slightly out of breath, but smiling with unmistakable gratitude. "Thank you," she said warmly. "You just saved me another 10 minutes. Ethan gave a small nod. "You are welcome." The doors closed, and silence settled between them as the elevator began climbing. Olivia adjusted the stack of folded linens in her arms before noticing that Ethan had shifted slightly to create more space for her. "I appreciate that," she said with an easy smile. "These towels always look lighter until I have to carry them." Ethan glanced toward the linens, then back at the glowing floor numbers. "You did not drop a single one." Olivia laughed softly. "Years of practice." For reasons he could not explain, the sound lingered in his thoughts longer than it should have. The elevator reached the 22nd floor. The doors opened, but Ethan remained standing perfectly still. Michael, waiting outside with a folder in his hands, looked surprised that his employer had not stepped out. Only after the doors began closing again did Ethan quietly press the open button once more and exit, almost as though he had forgotten where he was supposed to be. Olivia never noticed. She simply waved politely as the elevator continued upward toward the housekeeping department. Michael studied Ethan with open curiosity while they walked toward the executive offices. "Is everything all right?" he asked. Ethan looked back once toward the elevator indicator before answering in a voice calmer than ever. "Yes." After a brief pause, he added something that surprised even himself. "Someone thanked me today as though it actually mattered." Michael said nothing, but he quietly realized he had just witnessed something he had never seen before. For the first time in many years, Ethan Park walked into an important meeting carrying the memory of a stranger's smile instead of the weight of another business decision. The following morning arrived with the same steady rhythm that governed every weekday inside Sterling Tower, yet something invisible had changed. Ethan entered the lobby precisely at 8 o'clock, as he always did, but instead of walking directly toward the private elevator, his eyes instinctively drifted across the polished marble floor as though searching for someone he had no reason to expect. Employees greeted him respectfully before quickly returning to their routines. He acknowledged each greeting with the same calm nod that had become part of his reputation, but Michael noticed the brief glance Ethan gave toward the housekeeping entrance before the elevator doors opened. It lasted only a second. Even so, it was enough to leave Michael quietly puzzled. On the 26th floor, Olivia Brooks was already replacing fresh linens in executive conference rooms before the first meetings of the day began. She worked with practiced efficiency, straightening chairs, polishing glass tables until they reflected the morning sunlight, and quietly greeting everyone she encountered with the same sincere warmth. She thanked the maintenance technician who repaired a loose cabinet hinge. She held a door open for an intern struggling to carry several boxes. She smiled at the elderly security officer who had worked in the building for more than 20 years and asked whether his granddaughter had enjoyed her school recital. None of those conversations lasted more than a minute, yet each person walked away smiling. Olivia never realized that those small moments were the reasons so many people looked forward to seeing her every morning. Just before lunch, Ethan stepped out of a lengthy executive meeting. Normally, he would return immediately to his office, but instead he paused near the central elevator bank where employees from every department crossed paths throughout the day. Michael quietly adjusted the schedule on his tablet. "Your next meeting begins in 15 minutes, he reminded him. Ethan gave a slight nod, but remained where he was. Moments later, the elevator doors opened, and Olivia carefully pushed a housekeeping cart into the hallway while balancing a stack of neatly folded towels. She almost passed Ethan without noticing him until one towel slipped from the top of the pile and drifted gently onto the polished floor. Before anyone else reacted, Ethan bent down, picked it up with both hands, and carefully folded the corner that had unfolded when it landed. Olivia looked genuinely surprised. "Thank you again," she said with the same natural smile she had offered the day before. "I should probably stop making you rescue my towels." Ethan handed it back to her. "You seem to carry more than anyone else in this building." Olivia laughed softly. "Only because everyone else is busy carrying something different." Her answer lingered in the quiet hallway for a moment. Ethan found himself considering those words far longer than he expected. She was not complaining. She was simply stating a truth with remarkable kindness. As Olivia continued toward the next conference room, she paused beside a decorative plant that had begun to wilt beneath the afternoon sunlight. Without hesitation, she poured the last few ounces of water from her own reusable bottle into the dry soil before walking away. No one appeared to notice except Ethan. The gesture was so small that it could easily have been forgotten, yet it revealed something impossible to imitate. Kindness had become her habit rather than her performance. Michael watched the entire exchange from several steps away. When Olivia disappeared around the corner, he quietly looked at Ethan. "Would you like me to find out more about her?" he asked. Ethan remained silent for several seconds before shaking his head. "No," he answered calmly. "If I learn anything, I would rather hear it from her." Michael slipped the tablet back under his arm without another question. As they walked toward the executive offices, Ethan glanced once more toward the hallway where Olivia had disappeared, realizing that for the second day in a row, the most meaningful conversation of his morning had lasted less than 1 minute, yet somehow it had become the part of the day he remembered most. By the end of the week, the familiar rhythm of Sterling Tower had quietly begun arranging itself around moments neither Ethan nor Olivia could have predicted. Every morning the elevators carried hundreds of people to dozens of different floors, yet somehow their schedules crossed with surprising consistency. Sometimes they shared less than 30 seconds together. Sometimes they exchanged only a polite greeting before continuing in opposite directions. Still, those brief encounters gradually became the calmest part of Ethan's day. Olivia never noticed the pattern because she treated every person with the same effortless kindness. Whether she greeted a senior executive, a security officer, a delivery driver, or another member of the housekeeping team, her warm smile never changed. One afternoon, she entered the employee cafe carrying a small paper bag instead of eating in the executive dining area where complimentary meals were available to management. She ordered a bowl of soup and sat near the window overlooking the city. As she prepared to eat, she noticed an elderly maintenance worker searching through his pockets with an embarrassed expression before quietly returning the tray to the counter. Without hesitation, Olivia stood, walked over, and placed her meal ticket beside his. "I brought my lunch today," she said with an easy smile, even though the paper bag beside her contained only an apple and a peanut butter sandwich. The maintenance worker thanked her repeatedly while she returned to her table as though nothing unusual had happened. Ethan had entered the cafe only moments earlier with Michael after a meeting and had witnessed the entire exchange without being seen. "Did she know him?" Michael asked. Ethan slowly shook his head. "I do not think she needed to." The answer lingered between them long after the elderly man gratefully carried his lunch to another table. Later that afternoon, Ethan stepped into the elevator expecting to ride alone, only to see Olivia rush through the doors just before they closed, balancing a small toolbox in one hand and a clipboard in the other. She smiled the moment she recognized him. "Looks like I made it again." Ethan allowed the corner of his mouth to lift almost imperceptibly. "You seem to have perfect timing." Olivia laughed. "Not always. I just keep trying until I catch the right elevator." The simple reply stayed with him as they rode upward in comfortable silence. When the elevator stopped on the 18th floor, Olivia noticed a young intern standing outside looking overwhelmed by several heavy storage boxes. Before the doors could close, she stepped out, placed her own toolbox on the floor, and helped the intern carry the first load down the hallway. Ethan watched through the narrowing gap as she encouraged the nervous young employee with reassuring words before the doors finally closed. He realized she never measured kindness by convenience. She simply noticed people who needed help. That evening, Michael organized the following week's executive schedule and quietly frowned. Ethan had requested several minor adjustments, moving meetings by 15 minutes here and 20 minutes there. None of the changes affected important business decisions, yet together they created one unexpected result. Nearly every morning now began at the exact time Olivia usually entered the lobby. Michael looked up from the calendar with a knowing expression. "That is an unusual coincidence," he observed carefully. Ethan reviewed the schedule without appearing concerned. "Perhaps." After a thoughtful pause, he added, "Some routines are worth protecting." Michael closed the folder without another question, but as he watched Ethan leave the office, he realized the man who had once arranged every hour around business had quietly begun arranging small pieces of his day around someone who had never once asked for his attention, his influence, or even his last name. Monday morning arrived wrapped in cool autumn sunlight that spilled across the glass walls of Sterling Tower, filling every hallway with bright reflections that made the building seem almost weightless. Employees hurried toward another busy week. Elevators opened and closed without pause, and conversations echoed softly through polished corridors. Everything appeared exactly the same as it had every other Monday. Only Ethan noticed that something felt different. When he entered the lobby at precisely 8 o'clock, his eyes instinctively searched for the familiar housekeeping cart that usually appeared near the reception desk. It was not there. He waited inside the executive elevator a few extra seconds before allowing the doors to close quietly, telling himself that schedules naturally changed. Yet throughout the morning, he found his attention drifting toward the hallway outside his office each time footsteps passed by. Michael noticed the distraction during an executive meeting when Ethan paused halfway through reviewing a financial proposal after hearing distant laughter from the corridor. It lasted only a moment before Ethan returned to the discussion, but even that brief interruption felt unusual. After the meeting concluded, Michael carefully closed his notebook. "Would you like me to ask whether the housekeeping schedule changed?" he asked. Ethan considered the question before shaking his head.
"No."
"Everyone deserves the privacy of an ordinary life." Michael nodded respectfully, though he quietly realized that Ethan had become concerned about someone for the first time since they had known each other. Nearly an hour later, Ethan finally saw Olivia pushing her housekeeping cart toward the executive floor. Instead of her usual cheerful greeting, she seemed slightly tired, though her smile remained genuine. As she organized fresh towels outside a conference room, Ethan approached with the same calm composure that rarely revealed his thoughts.
"Good morning," he said.
Olivia looked up and smiled. "Good morning. I am sorry if I missed our usual elevator ride today. My neighbor's little boy was sick, so I stayed with him until his grandmother came home before coming to work." Ethan listened quietly. "Is he all right?" Olivia nodded. He is much better now. He mostly needed someone to sit beside him until family arrived. She answered so naturally that it sounded like the most ordinary responsibility in the world. Ethan realized she had delayed her own workday without expecting recognition simply because someone needed help. Before he could respond, Grace Collins, one of the executive assistants, hurried down the hallway carrying several folders that suddenly slipped from her hands. Papers scattered across the polished floor. Without hesitation, Olivia parked her housekeeping cart and knelt to gather every page before anyone else reacted. Ethan immediately joined her, carefully collecting the remaining documents while Grace repeatedly apologized for interrupting both of them. Within moments, the folders were neatly reorganized. Grace smiled with obvious relief. Thank you. I do not know what I would have done without both of you. Olivia laughed softly. Probably exactly what we just did, only a little slower. Grace walked away smiling. Ethan looked at Olivia, noticing how easily she transformed small inconveniences into peaceful moments. You always seem to arrive exactly where someone needs you, he observed. Olivia gently shook her head while returning the last folder. I think everyone does. Most of us are simply too busy to notice. Her answer settled into the quiet hallway with unexpected weight. Later that afternoon, Ethan stood alone beside the wide office windows overlooking Chicago while those words echoed through his thoughts. He had spent years believing success came from always staying one step ahead of everyone else. Olivia seemed to believe something entirely different. She moved through each day by slowing down whenever another person needed her. As evening approached, Ethan left the building through the main entrance and happened to glance across the street. There, standing at a neighborhood bus stop instead of waiting for expensive transportation, Olivia smiled as she handed her spare umbrella to an elderly woman caught beneath gathering rain clouds. When the bus finally arrived, Olivia stepped aboard without the umbrella, allowing the older woman to keep it. Ethan watched silently as the bus disappeared into the city, realizing that kindness had become so deeply woven into Olivia's life that she no longer appeared aware she was doing anything extraordinary, and for the first time, he found himself wondering not who she was, but how someone learned to live that way. Several more weeks passed, and without either of them planning it, the quiet routine they had built around chance encounters became part of everyday life inside Sterling Tower. Ethan never interrupted Olivia while she worked, and Olivia never treated Ethan differently from anyone else in the building. To her, he was simply the thoughtful executive who always held the elevator, returned borrowed carts to their proper place, and thanked the housekeeping staff instead of walking past them. She still had no interest in asking about his title, his wealth, or the countless rumors that followed his name through the city. One afternoon, the building unexpectedly lost power for several minutes after a severe storm swept across downtown Chicago. Emergency lighting illuminated the hallways with a soft amber glow while employees calmly waited for backup generators to restore electricity. Olivia immediately began checking every floor to make sure elderly visitors and temporary workers were comfortable. Ethan happened to meet her near the stairwell carrying bottled water for several receptionists who had been working without air conditioning. Without saying much, they naturally began helping the same group of people. One carried supplies while the other reassured nervous visitors that everything would return to normal shortly. By the time the lights came back on, they had quietly solved problems that many people had overlooked. As they stood beside a large window watching the city slowly brighten again, Olivia smiled. People usually remember who stayed calm after something unexpected happens. Ethan looked at the busy streets below. And who taught you that? Olivia rested one hand on the handle of her housekeeping cart before answering. My grandmother used to say that character becomes visible when comfort disappears. Ethan remained silent for a thoughtful moment. Those words settled somewhere deeper than he expected. That evening, Michael entered Ethan's office carrying several documents requiring approval. Before discussing business, he hesitated. There is something you should probably know, he said carefully. Ethan looked up. Michael placed a newspaper on the desk. The front page featured a photograph from a recent charity event attended by several prominent business leaders. Ethan appeared in the background, And beneath the photograph, one article openly referred to him as the influential Korean businessman whose private organization had long been connected with powerful underground networks before transforming into a legitimate international enterprise years earlier. Although the article focused primarily on his current businesses, it repeated the title that had followed him for years: Mafia Boss. Michael quietly folded the newspaper. Eventually, someone inside the building will recognize your photograph. Ethan looked toward the office window where the evening skyline reflected across the glass. I know. Michael waited before asking the question that had remained unspoken for weeks. Does she know? Ethan slowly shook his head.
No.
The answer was calm, yet heavier than any business decision waiting on his desk. The following morning, Olivia entered the employee lounge to refill the coffee station before beginning work. Two contractors sitting nearby were discussing the newspaper article with obvious fascination. One of them unfolded the page across the table, revealing Ethan's photograph beside the headline. Olivia glanced at it only briefly before recognizing the familiar face. She stopped walking for just a second. The smiling executive she had shared dozens of quiet conversations with suddenly stood beside headlines describing a life she had never imagined. She said nothing, quietly poured fresh coffee into the machine, and continued working exactly as she always had. Yet as she walked back toward the hallway carrying clean towels, one question gently settled into her thoughts. If the world saw Ethan through his reputation, why had every moment she shared with him revealed someone completely different? The next morning felt unusually quiet inside Sterling Tower, although nothing about the building itself had changed. Elevators continued carrying employees to every floor, receptionists welcomed visitors with practiced smiles, and the sound of rolling housekeeping carts echoed gently through polished hallways. Only Olivia noticed that something inside her own thoughts had become less certain. The newspaper article she had read the previous afternoon remained folded inside her locker, not because she intended to show anyone, but because she wanted to understand how two completely different versions of the same man could possibly exist. The headlines had described influence, power, and a past surrounded by whispered stories. The Ethan she knew thanked janitors, carried dropped towels, held elevator doors, and remembered the names of security guards. Neither image seemed false. They simply refused to fit together. When the executive elevator opened shortly after 8 o'clock, Ethan stepped inside as he always did. A few seconds later, Olivia hurried toward the closing doors carrying fresh linens. Ethan instinctively pressed the open button before she could even ask. She entered with the same warm smile he had come to recognize, but this morning there was also quiet curiosity in her eyes. The elevator began its steady climb. Neither of them spoke immediately. Finally, Olivia looked toward him and asked in a gentle voice, "May I ask you something?" Ethan turned slightly. "Of course." Olivia hesitated only briefly. "Yesterday I saw an article about you." The silence that followed lasted no more than a few seconds, yet it seemed much longer. Ethan lowered his eyes for a moment before answering honestly. "Then you probably learned things I never told you." Olivia nodded. "I learned what strangers wrote about you." Ethan did not search for excuses or explanations. "Some of those things are true," he admitted. "Some belong to a life I have spent years trying to leave behind. I cannot erase my past, but I try very hard not to let it decide who I become each day." Olivia listened without interrupting. The elevator continued upward floor by floor until it stopped briefly to allow another employee to enter. They exchanged polite greetings before the doors closed again. After several more quiet moments, Olivia smiled exactly as she always had. "Then I think I will keep believing the person I have actually met." Ethan looked at her with unmistakable surprise. "You are not afraid?" Olivia gently shook her head. "I would be afraid if you treated people the way those headlines describe. But every morning I have watched you choose respect when no one expected it. That tells me more than any newspaper ever could." Ethan had negotiated billion-dollar agreements without hesitation, yet those simple words left him unable to answer immediately. For the first time in many years, someone had judged him not by reputation, not by influence, and not by rumors, but by ordinary moments that most people would never notice. When the elevator reached Olivia's floor, She stepped out carrying her stack of neatly folded linens before turning back with a familiar smile. "Have a good day, Ethan." The doors quietly closed between them. Ethan remained standing inside the elevator long after it continued climbing toward the executive offices. Later that afternoon, he called Michael into his office with an unusual request. "Beginning next month," he said calmly, "I want every employee in this building, regardless of position, to receive improved health benefits, paid training opportunities, and updated break rooms." Michael looked surprised. "Should we announce the changes under your name?" Ethan slowly shook his head.
No.
"If people notice anything, let them notice that they are being treated better." As Michael left to begin the work, Ethan walked toward the wide office windows overlooking Chicago. Somewhere below, Olivia continued moving from room to room with the same quiet kindness that had never asked him to become anyone except the best version of himself, and for the first time, he realized that the life he wanted to build was no longer measured by the height of the office where he stood, but by the kind of person he became each time the elevator doors quietly opened. The announcement appeared without warning on a quiet Wednesday morning. Employees arriving at Sterling Tower found a letter waiting in their inboxes explaining that every member of the staff, from executive assistants to janitors, from receptionists to maintenance workers, would receive expanded health benefits, additional paid training opportunities, renovated employee lounges, and new professional development programs beginning the following month. No executive signature appeared beneath the message. It simply stated that the changes reflected the company's renewed commitment to every person who contributed to the building each day. Excitement quietly spread through every department. People compared details over coffee, smiled in hallways, and thanked managers who admitted they had not known the announcement was coming. Olivia read the letter during her morning break, smiled warmly, then folded it into her apron pocket before returning to work. To her, the improvements mattered because they would help families who worked hard every day without expecting recognition. She never once wondered who had made the decision. Later that afternoon, Ethan stepped out of another meeting and noticed several members of the housekeeping staff laughing together inside one of the newly renovated break rooms where fresh furniture had quietly replaced chairs that had been worn for years. He watched from the hallway without entering, satisfied simply to see people enjoying a place designed with genuine respect. Michael approached carrying a folder, but paused beside him. "They are happier than I have ever seen them," he observed. Ethan answered softly. Then the decision was worthwhile. Before either man continued down the corridor, Olivia emerged from the break room carrying a clipboard. She stopped when she noticed Ethan standing nearby. "Have you seen the new lounge?" she asked with unmistakable excitement. Ethan smiled almost imperceptibly. "Not yet." Olivia gestured toward the open doorway. Someone thought about every detail. Better lighting, comfortable chairs, even books people can borrow during lunch. Whoever planned it must have listened very carefully. Ethan looked through the doorway before turning back toward her. Perhaps someone finally started paying attention. Olivia laughed gently, believing he was speaking only as another employee who appreciated thoughtful changes. "I hope they keep paying attention," she replied before continuing toward the next floor. Ethan watched her leave, realizing that the greatest compliment he had ever received was one she never intended to give him personally. That evening he stood beside the wide office windows overlooking the city while autumn rain drifted quietly across the skyline. Michael entered carrying another schedule for the following week. "There is one more invitation," he said. "A charity gala on Friday. Every major business leader in Chicago will attend." Ethan barely looked at the envelope before setting it aside. "Decline it." Michael hesitated. "You have accepted every year." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "I have something else planned." Friday evening arrived, and instead of attending the elegant ballroom downtown, Ethan appeared at the neighborhood community center where Olivia volunteered after work helping children with reading lessons. Dressed in a simple navy sweater instead of a tailored suit, he quietly carried several boxes filled with new books that had been donated anonymously. Olivia looked up in pleasant surprise when she saw him standing in the doorway. "I did not know you volunteered here," she said. Ethan smiled with a calm warmth that no one inside Sterling Tower had ever seen before. "I am still learning," he answered honestly. Olivia handed him a stack of children's storybooks and pointed toward a row of small tables where eager young readers waited for the evening program to begin. As Ethan walked toward them, surrounded by laughter instead of boardroom conversations, he realized he no longer measured the value of an evening by the importance of the guests in the room. He measured it by the difference the room might make in someone else's life, and without either of them saying a single word about it, Olivia quietly recognized that the man standing beside her was becoming someone even better than the person she had first met inside a closing elevator. As autumn gradually gave way to the first signs of winter, Sterling Tower felt different in ways that could not be measured by financial reports or architectural design. Employees greeted one another more often. Managers spent time listening instead of rushing through conversations. Maintenance workers found handwritten notes of appreciation left beside freshly repaired equipment. Even visitors occasionally commented that the building somehow felt warmer despite the colder weather outside. Olivia continued moving through each day exactly as she always had, never imagining that the quiet example she set had slowly influenced an entire workplace. One afternoon, she was organizing supplies inside a storage room when Grace Collins entered carrying a small envelope. "Someone asked me to give this to you," Grace said with a smile before walking away. Curious, Olivia opened it and discovered 2 tickets to the city's annual winter charity concert, accompanied by a simple handwritten note. "Thank you for reminding people that kindness deserves to be practiced, not merely admired." No signature appeared beneath the message. Olivia quietly smiled, suspecting who had written it, but deciding not to ask. Later that evening, she found Ethan standing beside the large windows overlooking the city after most employees had already gone home. Snowflakes drifted gently through the fading light, covering rooftops with a thin blanket of white. Olivia approached with the 2 tickets still resting inside the envelope. "I think these belong to you," she said playfully. Ethan looked at them before smiling with quiet honesty. "I hoped you might use one of them." Olivia tilted her head. "Only one." Ethan nodded. "The other is for me, if you would not mind sharing the evening." She looked at him for a thoughtful moment before laughing softly. "That is probably the most carefully worded invitation anyone has ever given me." Ethan allowed himself another genuine smile. "I have not had much practice." A few days later, they attended the charity concert together, arriving without security escorts, photographers, or public announcements. They chose seats among ordinary families, teachers, nurses, retirees, and volunteers rather than accepting reserved seating near the stage. During intermission, they shared hot chocolate while watching children admire the holiday decorations filling the historic theater. Olivia noticed that several people quietly approached Ethan, not to ask for favors or business opportunities, but simply to thank him for community projects that had quietly improved neighborhoods across the city. Ethan greeted every person with the same humility Olivia had come to recognize. Walking back toward the parking garage after the concert, snow continued falling gently across the quiet streets. They paused at a crosswalk where a young father struggled to push a stroller through fresh snow while carrying grocery bags. Without exchanging a word, Ethan stepped forward to help guide the stroller across the intersection while Olivia carried several of the grocery bags until the family safely reached the opposite sidewalk. When they returned to one another, both smiled at the coincidence. "Looks like we noticed the same thing," Olivia said. Ethan nodded. "You have a way of making people easier to see." They continued walking beneath the softly falling snow until they reached the familiar entrance of Sterling Tower, where everything had quietly begun months earlier with a closing elevator door. Ethan looked toward the polished lobby before turning back to Olivia. "Do you remember the first morning we met?" Olivia smiled warmly. "You held the elevator because I was running late." Ethan gently shook his head. "I thought I was holding the door for someone else." He paused, watching snowflakes settle across the empty sidewalk. "Now I think you were opening one for me." Olivia did not answer immediately. Instead, she looked up at the glowing windows stretching high above them, realizing that some journeys begin with remarkable events while others begin with one ordinary decision that quietly changes the direction of 2 lives forever. Nearly 1 year later, The first snowfall of the season covered Chicago with the same quiet beauty that had surrounded the evening when Ethan and Olivia first walked out of Sterling Tower together after the charity concert. The city looked different beneath fresh snow, yet inside the building the morning routine remained wonderfully familiar. Employees greeted one another by name, security officers exchanged friendly conversations with executives, and the housekeeping department had become one of the most respected teams in the company. The improvements Ethan had quietly introduced months earlier had continued spreading beyond the building itself. Scholarships for employees' children had been established. Professional training programs helped custodians become supervisors, receptionists advance into management, and maintenance workers learn new skills. None of the announcements carried Ethan's photograph. He believed the results should always matter more than recognition. Olivia continued arriving each morning a few minutes early, carrying the same warm smile that had never depended upon promotions, compliments, or attention. She still greeted everyone from delivery drivers to board members with equal kindness, and she still believed that every person deserved to feel seen before they felt important. One Friday morning, as she hurried across the polished lobby carrying freshly folded linens, the familiar elevator doors began sliding shut. Before she could reach them, a familiar hand pressed the open button. Olivia laughed the moment she stepped inside. Some things never change. Ethan smiled, no longer hiding the warmth that had once seemed impossible for him to express. I hope this one never does. The elevator climbed slowly through the building that had quietly witnessed every step of their unexpected journey. Neither of them felt the need to fill the silence with unnecessary words. The comfortable quiet between them had become its own language. When they reached the executive floor, Ethan did not step out immediately. Instead, he turned toward Olivia with the same calm honesty that had gradually replaced years of emotional distance. Do you remember what you told me after reading that newspaper article? Olivia nodded thoughtfully. I said I would rather believe the person I had actually met. Ethan lowered his eyes briefly before looking back at her. That sentence changed my life more than you ever realized. It reminded me that every day gives us another chance to become the person others deserve to meet. The elevator continued upward after the doors closed again, carrying them toward the housekeeping level where their story had truly begun. Olivia looked at him with quiet affection and said, I never changed you, Ethan. I only met the person who had been waiting for someone to believe he could still become better. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The soft hum of the elevator filled the peaceful silence as sunlight reflected across the polished walls. When the doors finally opened, Ethan stepped out beside Olivia instead of remaining inside. Together they walked through the hallway, where employees greeted them. Naturally, no longer surprised to see the company's quiet leader walking beside the woman who had unknowingly transformed an entire workplace simply by treating every person with dignity. Michael watched from the opposite end of the corridor and smiled to himself. He remembered the man who once measured every day by meetings, negotiations, and carefully planned schedules. Now, the most important part of Ethan's morning was a simple elevator ride shared with someone who had never asked him for influence, wealth, or status. Outside the windows, snow continued falling gently across the city while life moved forward with its usual rhythm. Inside Sterling Tower, another ordinary workday quietly began. Olivia adjusted the stack of fresh linens in her arms before smiling at Ethan one more time. We should get to work. Ethan nodded with peaceful certainty. We already are. Side by side, they walked toward another ordinary day filled with small acts of kindness that no newspaper would ever print and no audience would ever applaud, yet those quiet moments continued changing lives one person at a time, proving that the strongest hearts are not won by power or wealth, but by steady compassion. And that sometimes the greatest love story begins because one person chooses to hold an elevator door open for someone they have never met before.